Welcome all you would-be's out there to lesson number 9, Hand Tools Part 2. I just couldn't say enough about hand tools in the first lesson, so we're going to have another lesson on hand tools. And it's because most would-be's, students who would be masters, want to skip the hand tools. A would-be thinks, what is the first power tool I need to buy? So they want to jump forward and skip hand tools. And this lesson is all about why you shouldn't skip the hand tools. You know, first you have to become the wood. Then you become the tool. Then you become the work. To fully understand the wood, you have to work it with hand tools. You can't put electricity between you and the wood and understand the wood. You have to work it with hand tools. And sometimes hand tools can actually be faster than power tools. Back early in my career, was at a party one time with another woodworker, and everybody was a little into their cups, and we had a bet on if a Japanese log saw could cut a tree down faster than a chainsaw. Of course, the Western world is all about power and overpowering, and the Eastern or Oriental world is all about finesse. So we made a little bet, and we went out to his farm where he was cutting a road through the woods, and he needed to cut some trees down. And I had a Japanese log saw. I had this right here. And he had a chainsaw in his truck. We pulled up on this road and we saw two trees there, two about 7, 8 inch diameter trees. I said, well, I'll take the one on the right, you take the one on the left. And we said, go. And I got out of the truck, walked over to that tree and cut it down with this saw before he could get his chainsaw cranked. So sometimes hand tools are faster. And suppose you're repairing furniture. Well, sometimes it's easier just to sit down on a chair and cut the joint with a hand tool into that chair post before you can take it, pick it up, try to get it into a table saw, try to get it into a machine, or try to get a handheld power tool on it. You can cut it all with a hand saw and chisel, put it all together and glue it up, and you're done. After a while, you can get real good at cutting joints with hand tools. And you can only get so good. I mean, once it's perfect, it's perfect. I mean, after you get as good as you can get, there's only one thing you can do, and that's get faster. So cabinet makers were always bragging about how fast they can do something, because that's the way you make a living at it. Hand tools can get you out of a jam when you're working on something. Suppose you've laid up the side of a big armoire, the side of a big cabinet, and that side of that cabinet may have a bunch of dados in it. And you're going to start gluing up this cabinet, and suddenly you realize that a couple of those dados rose up off the table, or the router base rose up, and the dados aren't quite as deep as they need to be. Well, it's going to be hard to go back and get a machine to cut the same dado, only make it a little deeper, or take a router and try to guide it and brace it and try to make that. So it's much easier to do it with a hand router, something like this, which my master called an old woman's tooth. It may not be politically correct anymore, but it kind of looks like a tooth hanging down there. It's one thing hanging down. Now this is a very sharp pointed chisel. And you work this, you put it in the dado and you pull it to you, and it cuts that deep. So if you're gluing up this cabinet and you realize that there's a small mistake because the dados aren't deep enough, instead of trimming off the board that goes into the dados, you just take one of these, 5 minutes, and your mistake is erased. You have to learn how to use hand tools. They're much better. I don't know of one school, no woodworking school anywhere, that will take a new student and allow them to work straight with machines and power tools. There's always some period of time that they require you to work with hand tools. At RIT, the first quarter you had to work with hand tools. You had to square a board all with hand tools, planes and saws, and you had to make your project all with hand tools. Not only is hand tools faster, but sometimes hand tools can do things that power tools have a hard time doing. The biggest payday I ever had in the 45 years of woodworking, I had a client one time who was involved in the installation of elevators. And your new elevators, they have wooden panels, and some elevators in downtown Atlanta look like Chippendale china cabinets turned inside out. They're all fancy woodworking. Those are very lucrative commissions for me, but he had a problem with plastic-covered laminate panels inside an elevator. Usually they're vertical, but these were horizontal, and they were butted right next to each other, stacked up on the walls, on the back, and on both walls, just these stacked up panels. Well, it turns out the architect had called for a chamfer on the edge of these plastic panels. They were installed, and the elevator cab was operating, and there was no chamfer on those panels. So he put out a request for bids from different shops to come in and put a chamfer, put a small little 45-degree angle on no more than 1/8 of an inch on the edges of both those panels. So a lot of shops gave him a bid for taking the panels off, running a router down it, putting the panels back together again, and for 2 elevator cabs, that was well over $5,000. And so other shops gave him a bid on taking a venting bit, a sharp-pointed bit that cuts a V groove in wood, and putting it in a router and putting a board next to the seam between the panels and running that router down that board. And of course that has to be very carefully done. If that board is off, then the router runs off the line between the 2 panels. And that was around, $3,500 to $4,000. And he asked me if I would do it, and I was coming up with the same sort of figures until I realized you didn't need power tools. You could scrape that line in between the panels, and this is something they give away at the paint store. It used to open bottle caps when bottles had caps on them, but this end opened a paint can. It fits underneath the lid and opens the paint can real easy. So I took one of these and I sharpened it, just like that. So there's a little V groove on the very end. And then I sharpened it very sharp and hooked a little burr on it. And then I just took this tool in my hand and drug it, scraped between the 2 panels, and it scraped that chamfer off. I had a contract with him to do 2 cabs for $2,500. I did 1 cab in the morning, and I did 1 cab in the afternoon, and he was very grumpy when he wrote me a check for $2,500 for 1 day's work. And that's only because I didn't use power tools. I went to hand tool. Every other bid against me was power tools. So, sometimes power tools aren't the way to go. So when you're struggling with your hand tools, trying to get them to work, remember you're learning things that it's going to pay off later. You can almost be as accurate with a hand tool as you can with a machine. Say a marking gauge. You take the marking gauge and you're going to put a tenon on the end of this board with a hand tool. Well, you set this and you scribe this line. This is not a pencil line. This line is being cut into the wood. It's a little knife on this end. See, that line right there is in the wood. And you do that because if you drew the line with a pencil, then you put your chisel on that line. You don't know whether to leave the line, split the line, or cut the line out. But with a scribe line, your chisel finds that line. You could find that line in the dark. And it's extremely accurate. You cut all the way around on that line. So hand tools are going to pay off. Don't be one of those would-be's who goes out and says the first thing he wants to buy is a power tool. You got to learn hand tools or to really appreciate the wood. And you know, like I made that tool for putting a chamfer on those panels, you can make your own tools. They come in handy. I once had a sculpture commission where I needed to clamp two big pieces of sculpture together that had cracked in the middle, and I made my own clamp for a sculpture. See, that's a hand tool, but this is called this right here is called a cross clamp. Made by Westler, it fits on their clamp, so you can cross clamp. But this was just a C-clamp I made for this one job, which was repairing a big sculpture. And that was a lucrative project. So don't be discouraged with hand tools because it's a little hard to get them going to begin with, but actually the rest of your career is going to be much easier if you understand all the hand tools you're working with first. So just get some hand tools and have at it. And you can teach yourself, you can learn yourself. If you can go to any person, if you can get instruction in person, it's a lot like me telling you how to play golf. Well, I can tell you how to play golf, but you're not going to be a golfer until somebody goes out and watches you swing and corrects you. Well, go to a school, go to a college, university, and high schools. They have wood shops. They have courses at night you can take. Be corrected in person if you can, because it's more important that a teacher watch you do something and corrects you. The big trick in hand tools, they have to be sharp. I mean sharp. I mean sharp as a razor. You've all seen the amateur in his garage or in his backyard trying to saw a board. The saw is bending, he's cursing. There's no trick to sawing. It's the professional has a sharp saw and the amateur doesn't. So tools have to be sharp, razor sharp. So next time we'll get to how to sharpen your hand tools.